let me share some of the best ways to design mobile apps in Photoshop. We're going to heavily rely on shape layers, especially rectangles, so it's essential you understand the do's and don'ts. We'll also start to recreate this design from scratch. You should already have a 720 by 1280 artboard on your screen. If not, add one now and you might want to drag in this PNG of the completed design and place it to one side. Okay, let's start from the top with tip number 1. Never marquee and fill. This is a technique that refuses to go away, similar to Die Hard movies around Christmas time. Here's how this goes. Create a new raster layer, then grab the rectangular marquee and make a selection. Next, go to Edit, Fill, because you're obviously not going to use any hotkeys. From this new window, you select how to fill your selection. After you've selected something, press OK. Apparently you've done a good job. This is probably one of the worst ways to work in Photoshop. It's simultaneously also one of the best ways to show that you know next to nothing about designing websites or mobile apps. Please don't use this approach. The result is a raster layer that drastically limits your options regarding further editing or resizing. So let's delete it. That brings us to tip 2. Use precise measurements for your shapes. No matter if you click anywhere on the canvas and input your width and height values, or you simply draw a rectangle and then resize it, it's important you use exact measurements. This is especially important since the artboards have a clipping effect. This means you can create oversized shapes, but because of this property, the excess won't show up. The problem with working like that is that the alignment tools won't work as expected. So if the artboard is 720 pixels wide, your rectangle should match that. Here, I'll draw a rectangle far bigger than it should be. It seems fine because the artboard helps us out, but we need to adjust it. That brings us to point number 3. Always use the Live Shape Properties panel. Ctrl-T is fine in some instances, but in most cases it's best you make your adjustments straight from this panel. The reasoning is simple. You get more control when you don't eyeball it. Here, I'll type in 720 by 48. This needs repositioning, and as long as it's inside the artboard, I can use this panel for that as well. The X and Y values tell us where the layer is placed. I'll put 0 in both fields, and this will automatically top and left align it. Yep, perfect. Let's move on to another shape underneath this one. Here's a sloppy rectangle that brings us tip number 4. Just in case you're fond of the free transform command through its hotkey Ctrl-T. In the options bar, always use pixels instead of percentages. This is a bit tricky because that's the default unit measurement that Photoshop reverts to every time you close it. That means every single time you open up Photoshop, you have to change it yet again. To do that, right-click this area and now you can make the change. A bit frustrating that you have to do it for every session, but there's no way around that. Again, that's going to be 720 for the width, and for the height I'll go with 208. Later on in the course I'll explain my choices regarding these values. We have a bit of a problem here because both rectangles are black, a seamless transition to tip number 5. Don't drop the layer's opacity to change its colour. This is something you have to keep in mind, especially when working with dividers. Let me add one with the help of the rectangle tool. The size should be 640 by 2 pixels. Centre it horizontally. This can help divide your content, but it also improves the user's experience. The trouble is always finding that perfect shade of grey, light enough that it's subtle, but dark enough so that it's visible. What some designers like to do is get a random grey, something like so, and then drop the opacity, 70%, 50%, 30%, 10%, back and forth until they're happy. But this makes the developer's job far more difficult. The workaround is to choose a good colour from the get-go. Hit 0 to reset the opacity to 100%, and now let's choose a nice grey. I'll go with E3, 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 which is a colour code I know by heart because it hits that sweet spot. Now I can create a couple more copies and randomly place them in my artboard. Let's go back up to our 2 rectangles and talk about point number 6. Avoid using colour overlay. When you want to change a rectangle's colour, simply double-click on its thumbnail. You immediately get the colour picker and you can go to town. Plus, you can always pick colours from inside the project. Most users can sample colours from outside of the program as well, but there's a bug in Windows 10 that prevents that from happening. This happened to me, but after several updates, Windows, graphic card, drivers, Photoshop, it is now working. See how it's picking up colours from my browser? Great stuff. Nevertheless, why is color overlay a bad idea? Well, again, this throws off the developer, but it also messes with third-party programs that are extremely useful later down the road. You might think this way of working is going to slow you down, but here's tip number 7, a real lifesaver when it comes to increasing your speed. Use the Libraries panel to change colors quickly. Here's how this goes. First, open up Libraries from the top menu in case you don't have it in your workspace. Once you get it, click in this region to open up this drop-down menu. Choose the last item to create a new library. Choose any name, and now we're good to go. While having a rectangle selected, you need to click on this plus symbol. Photoshop will ask you if you want to save the layer as a whole, that would be the graphic option, its fill color, or your foreground color. Be aware that the fill color is the rectangle's color, while the foreground color refers to your top swatch here. If you go for this third option, this means you don't even need to have a layer selected. You can simply fool around with the color picker and your new choice is going to be immediately reflected here. For the bigger layer, I'll go with 164C9D. And now I'll add that to my library. Easy stuff. I'll repeat the process for the top rectangle, which should be a little bit darker, specifically 053A88. This is how you can set up your color palette for the entire project. But here's the good part. Let's say we have several layers that need their color changed. You simply grab them from the Layers panel or from the canvas, and you click once on this swatch. There you go, it's as simple as that. This is how you efficiently adjust lots of shape layers. It's an incredible feature that does wonders to your speed, but of course it doesn't work if you use color overlay. Speaking of layer styles, that's the best way of adding a stroke. That's tip number 8. Activate any shape tool and check out the options bar. Never use this feature as it's one of the main sources of stress in Photoshop. Like I said in a previous lecture, don't change its thickness or any other setting. Just disable it by choosing this specific thumbnail. Let's create a circle for my avatar. Grab the ellipse tool and draw one out. Hold Shift to maintain a 1:1 aspect ratio. If you're not happy about its size, go to the Live Shape Properties panel, hit the chain icon and input your value. Here I'll go with 120 pixels. Right, now open up your layer styles and a stroke from here. As a reminder, if you don't want to use the FX button from the bottom of the Layers panel, you can double-click next to the layer's name. Okay, something like 3 pixels will look okay, and I'll set it to outside for this specific example. For the color, I'll use a very light grey so as not to clash with the blue shades from up top. Green or orange might work too. As a tip, you might want to make the circle white before you decide on a color. That usually helps you make a decision. Tip 9. Always apply your layer masks and/or clipping masks. We need to finish my avatar, so grab any picture and place it above this ellipse in the Layers panel. I have something already prepared, but feel free to use any photo. Next, you hold Ctrl and you click the circle's thumbnail to make a selection. In case it isn't right, deselect with Ctrl-D and reposition that photo. Repeat until you're happy. Now click on the layer mask icon from the bottom of the Properties panel. All is fine and well, we have our layer mask, but if you leave it like that, you'll have lots of issues with selecting layers around it. I'll go into specifics in the next lecture. For now, it's essential you apply your layer mask. To do that, first make sure it's not a smart object. If it is, you'll have to rasterize it. I like to grab the eraser tool by hitting E and then click once anywhere on the canvas. It will ask me if I want to rasterize, and I can immediately tap the spacebar key to confirm. Now, right-click it in the Layers panel and choose Apply Layer Mask. This is the best way to work with layer masks for app design projects. We're sacrificing some flexibility, but it won't interfere with some of our techniques from the next lecture. You may be used to clipping masks. Well, those bear the same problem. The solution is essentially the same, though it takes a different form, merging. Let's repeat the process next to it. Say we have a circle and a photo above it. Give me a minute. We use Alt-Control-G to create a clipping mask, and we're done. Great, but again, if we leave it as it is, it will interfere with our selections. So we'll have to convert these two to a smart object or merge them together with Ctrl-E. The second method isn't optimal because we'd lose the ability to adjust this stroke, so let's go with the smart object. Okay, looking good. The final tip is this. When merging two or more shape layers, the one that's on top in the Layers panel will determine the color of the new layer. Let me demonstrate by creating this switch. For the base, I'll go with a rounded rectangle that's 50 pixels wide and 20 pixels tall. The radius doesn't matter because the next step is to crank it up from the Properties panel. 10 is going to be the maximum allowed value because 10 plus 10 equals 20. Makes sense? Change its color to that dark blue and we can continue. Okay, now let's add the circle above it with the ellipse tool. 30 by 30 is going to be just fine. I'll randomly choose a color and I'll place it just right. Check the Layers panel. The circle is red and it's above the blue base. This means that when I hit Ctrl-E to merge, the new resulting shape layer will be red as well. Yep, there it is. So always make sure you double check before you merge them. Let me undo and we'll leave it like that for the moment. Okay, that's it for this lecture. These are my 10 tips that should make your life easier. You can check out the attached cheat sheet just in case you want a quick refresher. I'll see you in the next lecture, but please save your PSD on your drive and add step 1 on the end of the file name. See you soon.